Everybody, hello and welcome back to a Federal Drug Testing Services FAQ, my YouTube channel. And I am your host, Greg Henderson. And of course, for those who don't know who I am, I'm former FAA Drug and Alcohol Compliance Enforcement Inspector, Department of Interior Drug and Alcohol Program Manager, and 25-year military vet. And I've done DOD drug testing, compliance, and stuff as well for many years. So probably 15 years of experience throughout different federal entities. And today I have some special guests with me, and you guys asked for it, so I'm going to deliver it. And we're going to be talking about all things drug and alcohol testing that is new and relevant and things to come and some exciting new things in the industry. So I have two of the most knowledgeable people that I know. I know there's others, but these are two most knowledgeable that I know that I trust in their information. So if you see me rolling my eyes up, everybody, I'm kind of like looking at my 65-inch screen TV here in the hotel so I can read stuff. So I don't have a teleprompter in front of me. So the first person we're going to introduce is one of my mentors here. She calls and I talk to her often and bounce stuff off of her, and go way back to some other associations, and we'll talk about that merger and how that all came about and how's that going. So we have the NDASA's executive director. Joe is responsible for the day-to-day management of the association and for implementing its strategic vision under guidance of the board of directors and committees. So thank you for coming, Joe.
Thank you, Greg. Always a pleasure.
All right. And this lady here. All right, you guys know I'm a little more informal and a little whatever. I don't have my hat on today. I thought I'd take my hat off for this. But this name rings throughout the industry. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't care whether you HHS, whether you DOT, and if you're tuning into this, HHS is Department of Health and Human Services and DOT is Department of Transportation. And this name rings bells, and there's probably one or two other names in the industry that get spreads. And when people hear it, I feel like I'm in the military when I say these names and they just clam up. You know? They just like, oh my gosh, you know, did this oh, they said that, you know, and that is highly credible to her career. So Patrice Kelly is a leader in the development of drug and alcohol testing policy and the longest serving director of the Office of Drug and Alcohol Policy and Compliance, which is known as ODAPC in our world, at the Department of Transportation, and she has taken on the role as the Senior Policy Executive Advisor for NDASA. And those are the short versions of you guys' bios, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to, you guys' bios go like kind of.
That's perfectly fine.
But welcome, Patrice.
Thank you so much, Greg. And if I could just add my little mandatory disclaimer, I am actually still a U.S. Department of Transportation employee, and I'm on an interagency agreement with NDASA. And so the views that I'm expressing today and in my role in NDASA are my own. They have not been cleared, reviewed, or guided by the department. With that said, I was the primary author on oral fluid and both the notice of proposed rulemaking and the final rule. So I'm very excited to talk to you all about that today. However, they're Patrice Kelly's views, not the U.S. Department of Transportation's views. Thank you.
And I am so glad you said that, because that is one of the questions I get asked a lot from the actual federal agent, the federal employees. Is like, Patrice is doing what? And how's what? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know, but I'm glad you answered that. So everybody, there you go. You got your answer to that. I was, you know, people always just nosy. They're just nosy. So happy. Anyway.
It's public information.
I know, but I get asked that question. I say, I don't know. I was like, I don't know. You know? But now you know.
He's on detail, you guys.
He's just doing his job. He's not trying to.
Because I'm gonna tell you, Patrice, honestly, like when that came out, it rang throughout the industry. when they said that you were doing stuff with Endesa and whatever, and because of, whatever the government policies and whatever are, right? So it rang. My phone went off. And this was last year, like when that happened. And I was like, I don't know. I said, I don't know. And so now we know. So I'm glad you clarified that. But anyway. So you guys are here. We have a lot going on in the industry. There's a lot going on, and we just want to catch everybody up with what's going on in the industry. So let's first talk about, how did you get involved, Patrice, with this, and how did this role come about for you? Because it's awesome for the industry.
Mm-hmm. Right. It was something that the Department of Transport, actually throughout the federal government, the interagency personnel agreements, IPAs, are a device that's rarely used. There's a whole statutory provision on it. If you Google it, you can find more information on them. But they're a wonderful tool to create a public-private partnership where a government employee goes out for 1 to 2 years, gains experience from the industry, shares experience with the industry, and then brings that information back to their organization, their federal agency they're working for. So quite often it's done with educational institutions, but it's also something that's eligible to nonprofits. And I looked at several nonprofits in the course of doing this. DOT is a great employer. And I'm really honored that the secretary and the general counsel were enthusiastic about this opportunity. So I did look at other organizations, but I really decided that Endesa could be the best fit for the department so that we can really learn what's going on with industry, share that information. And because I am still a federal employee, I still have my federal email address, I still have my contacts and work with and for the department, I'm able to bring back information from what we're learning and bring that back and say, hey, you know what, this is something we need to clarify further with the oral fluid final rule, or this is a common problem, or this is a potential area where we want to really conduct a deeper dive or more outreach with our community. I'm not here with Endesa for an enforcement role. I'm not looking for people out of compliance. And what I tell everybody is, you can discuss things with me in this role that you can't discuss with the head of ODAPSI, because there's much more of a duty to say, oh, I think that might be out of compliance with one little provision. However, if somebody tells me something that is going to be detrimental to safety, that is something I am going to have to address with the department, because I am still a Department of Transportation employee. And I can tell you honestly, I haven't seen anything even close to that in Endesa, because the leadership of Endesa and the membership with whom we meet every Wednesday afternoon, about 150, anywhere from 150 to 350 people show up at these town hall meetings, which are virtual meetings that are available to members and non-members. But I have to say, the people who join in on these calls, and I know we could talk further about those, but people who join in have genuine questions. They provide each other with expert advice, and everybody has the common interest of safety, as we do at the U.S. Department of Transportation. So it's very exciting to be with my colleagues on the industry side and learning from them.
And I'm glad you said that, because all the other federal heads, representatives that come out from the different components, FAA, FMCSA, and all of them come out, and people are hesitant to want to talk to them, and whatever. And it's like, and you should talk to them, because that's why the Chet Stevensons are there. That's why these other ones are there, right? And they come out, and you should talk to them, because they should bring that stuff back, right? And say, hey, this is what's going on out here. This is what they're asking me. These are the questions. So to have you there, like I said, it bridges that gap of confusion between the federal government and the public, because they fear you guys. They fear the fines, they fear the inspections, they fear the audits, they fear these things. But how do we prepare them with the knowledge and information so that they can for and foremost be safety conscious, safety minded, and be prepared? It's not like I got you, we're coming out to get you. It's
exactly. And I'm glad you brought up, oh, Joe, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm really glad that our conversation is going in this direction, because this partnership began to be formed probably 9 or 10 years ago, when I just started asking curious questions of the drug program managers and Patrice. I think I want to say when I was really new in the industry, when I went to conferences and they put their emails up and said, if you have questions, call me, I always took that very literally. And I want to say maybe I was too dumb to know better, but although it's been such a gift to me, because I have picked up the phone and called so many times, that I now have those relationships where it's I can get clarity. And when something is confusing, and then because we've had these relationships now over the years, literally now it goes both ways. Hey, Joe, what are people asking you? What are they saying? What's going on? So when Indesa came together, I'm just really proud of the fact that people have always felt like this was a very safe place to have open communication. And yes, town hall is a major part of that. But I think people are now learning really through town hall that it is not a scary thing to ask questions and get your questions answered. We really try to be very careful to never embarrass anybody. We know we've got folks who come in and it's their first couple of weeks in drug testing versus people who've been in for 30 years. So there are no dumb questions. I mean, we've had the basic like, what was a few months ago, we had one that isn't direct observation immoral?
Yeah, when it's not done correctly.
Yes. Let's back up. Let's talk about, why we do that and how that came into place. So it gives us an opportunity to educate. But yeah, I know people can view that as scary, especially if you've been fined and that was your first experience. But developing the relationship and learning and just being curious and trying to get yourself educated. Really, everyone who is a drug program manager, they are our friends. They are our friends. And Patrice has done a great job over the years at fostering those interagency relationships and modeling that. And I'm so glad that she can do that really like with us, boots on the ground right now.
So before Patrice move forward with her portion, can you guys tell them how they can get access to the town hall? What is the process for them to even, become involved with you guys in Indesa Town Hall?
Yeah, so it's every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's free. It is a Zoom meeting, and we have it posted on our events calendar on indesa.com, which is ndasa.com. If they cannot find it, they can email me and I will make sure they get a calendar invitation. We send an email reminder every Wednesday morning if they're on our email list. So whether they want to be on the email list or just on a calendar reminder or just check it out one time, I'll send them the link. But I am at Joe McGuire at indesa.com, and that's JOMCGUIRE at indesa.com.
I'll put all that in the description box below, everybody, so you'll remember all that. You can be able to click and link and go on there. Okay. So, all right, back to you, Patrice. You're about to say something, and then
I jumped in.
Well, I was going to say, I was glad, Greg, that you brought up the fear factor of things, because yes, like you, I had been a credentialed FAA inspector. I was second in charge of the national program at FAA after being there, the first enforcement attorney at the FAA who took drug and alcohol cases. That's how I got involved with this 30 years ago.
Well, stop right there real quick. Stop right there real quick, Patrice. Can you tell me what else you do? Because everybody, you mentioned attorney, and you have other credentials that I just didn't get to that kind of brings all of this full circle. So can you tell me your other credentials as far as your education goes and all that stuff?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, I'm an attorney. I'm a licensed attorney. And I had been an FAA attorney when these drug abatement cases first started coming up, and that was in the early 1990s. And actually, none of the other lawyers wanted to handle them because they were science-y. And I was like, I don't know. I think they're more interesting than just busting your air traffic control level. So I really developed a passion early and moved into program management in the drug abatement division, and helped to write a lot of the FAA's early regulations right after the alcohol rules when I came in. So I came into program management. So I've really been involved with various modes, but I was with the FAA for 16 years and then moved over to the Office of the Secretary, where I became part of the ODAPSI team. And the Office of Drug and Alcohol Policy and Compliance is the secretarial staff. Unusual in the federal government. For those of you who are watching this who are feds, we're a -1 office. So it means we actually belong to the secretary, and the deputy secretary and the secretary are our first and second level supervisors. The drug issues and the alcohol issues are big in transportation, high visibility, and they want to make sure that they have an expert staff with whom they can communicate when we have a secretary and a deputy secretary, whenever we have a deputy and secretary who are faced with these questions. So I've testified on Capitol Hill. For the last ones who asked me to do that were the Obama administration. They asked me to do that in place of administration folks because they said that I was their expert and they wanted to make sure that they got the right information to the Hill. And that was, of course, a tremendous honor for me to be able to do that. But I've worked on developing the Part 40, that if you work with Part 40 at all, 49 CFR Part 40, I was part of the rulemaking team back in the year 2000. And I did receive, with the rest of my teammates, the Vice President Gore's Plain Language Award because the regulations are written very differently from other regulations. And then I was also, at that point, since I was still at FAA, I was responsible for revising the FAA regulations to match Part 40. Since moving over to the Office of the Secretary in 2007, I've worked on all of the ODAPSI rulemakings, but a lot of the modal rulemakings. ODAPSI's role, being a secretarial level office over the modes, involves a lot of consultation with the folks who you all are interacting with. The folks who are the inspectors and their bosses really fall under that purview, and they consult with ODAPSI. And they ask ODAPSI, what does this mean in Part 40? Because ODAPSI is the only office that can interpret. ODAPSI and the General Counsel's Office working together are the ones who create the interpretations, and ODAPSI is the expert staff who handles the Part 40 questions. So anyone who does not normally know where to go with those kinds of questions, I strongly recommend that you go to www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI. That's Oscar Delta Alpha Papa Charlie. And they have a phone number, it's 202-366-DRUG.
Right.
And then it's right, catchy, huh? And then there's also an ODAPSI webmail. So depending on how you want to communicate with ODAPSI, they are very open to questions and they are a tremendous expert staff. But I took a lot of pride in developing that office with an emphasis on outreach, Greg. So, for example, when I took over as director, our listserv was about 9,000 subscribers. Today, that listserv is about 130,000 subscribers. Wow. We went from public outreach of around 7,000 per year to a high of over 18,000 public contacts per year. It's a very small staff in ODAPSI, but they really do work very hard to try to address people's questions and keep things rolling. And as I said, they are the guardians of Part 40, and that's really your source. And the ODAPSI webpage that I mentioned, www.transportation.gov/ODAPSI, not only gives you the listserv, but it gives you everything you'd want to know about the DOT program, including how to get in touch with the modal advisors. So when you look for FAA, it will give you a hot link directly to their webmail. For other managers, they prefer to get the emails directly. So for example, Federal Railroad Administration, you'd be able to contact Jerry Powers, their program manager, directly through the ODAPSI webpage. So again, I encourage people to consider that to be one of the tools in their toolbox. It's tremendously helpful.
And also, it is a regulatory requirement for third-party service agents to be registered for listserv. So all of you who are not registered listserv, make sure you go in there. You collectors, you MROs, and even DERs. I tell you guys to register under ODAPSI listserv because you need to know what's going on in the industry. But for some of you, it is an expectable item. So
that is that is something we are constantly, as we're out on the road conducting trainings, we're seeing people go, what? We didn't know that. And it's a little surprising, but just on Tuesday when we read our training, we said, if you are a service agent and you are not on the ODAPSI listserv, you need to register today. And we just saw little ripples through the crowd. Well, what is that? How do I do that?
It's an inspectable item for
absolutely
third-party service. Yes, it is. They, not me anymore, but they will write you up for that.
Yes.
You will get written up for that. So now that we know a little bit more deeper about you, Patrice, and why people kind of stand at attention when they hear your name, this is why, everybody. It's not a fear factor, which brings us back to the fear factor portion. It's the knowledge base that we have knowledge. These three individuals you see, and there's a bunch of knowledge here, but Patrice, you just go a little deeper, with stuff in a little deeper history. So I guess we could pick back up now with the fear factor of what we were talking about, especially at least on the Fed side too. They're afraid to come out. I have yet to see any Feds come to conferences.
There are some, the FAA folks.
Okay,
who come. Tanya Templeton's group, the internal folks.
Yeah,
they do.
I can't say any. I take that back. I say very few, because I went when I was.
I'll give you that.
In 2015, I came to Vegas, and Allison, and I did go to a couple other conferences. I think the information need to get out more, so we need to have more come. How about that?
We absolutely do.
Okay.
We absolutely
Excellent point. And can you talk, Greg, about what you saw as valuable information about the conferences that you have gone to? Because I think that's where we can tell you what we do within DESA further.
All right. So I guess this will go back to Joe. So there was DESA before in DESA. So now people are confused between DESA and DESA. And then once you explain that, then I can explain the experience as the transitioning, because they sound similar to certain people when you hear it and they talk fast and DESA, right? They still think DESA exists. And if they're Googling and looking for DESA, is it going to connect them to DESA? So can you talk about that real quick?
Right. Well, early in 2023, we were contacted by the board of directors from DESA, and they requested to merge into DESA. And I was also part of DESA. DESA was the Drug and Alcohol Testing Industry Association, an organization that was built over 30 years ago. I had been very involved there, was on the board of directors. But one thing I just saw as a board member and a member, and I heard from a lot of members, they wanted advocacy. They wanted strong advocacy for our industry, particularly as we see changing state laws around marijuana that were very confusing. And at that time, it just was not part of the vision and mission that DESA really saw strongly needed to have attention. They were doing other things very well. That was just not where they wanted to engage. And there's another association that's the same. And I had some conversations with folks, and I said, I feel very passionately that this is something that we need, because my experience was that our industry was under attack by those who want to see drug testing go away. And of course, we've seen that come to fruition over the last particularly 6 years. So I was a little hesitant to start a third organization because I knew that would tax people, but I also was hearing from enough people on the ground that I knew that this was something they wanted. So we launched, I formed a sort of an exploratory group in 2018. We launched in 2019 officially. And we just had our March. This March will be our 6th anniversary, actually. So I think I got that wrong. Exploratory Committee in 2017, launched in 2018, first conference and all of that took place in 2019. So we are now the largest industry association. We grew really fast. We had our first 100 members within 90 days. Our membership doubled every year, even through the pandemic. And I think the difference is for INDESA, National Drug and Alcohol Screening Association. I think the big difference is it truly is member owned, member driven, but also member operated. So we were the only association that had experienced drug and alcohol testing professionals that are running, doing the administrative work on the day-to-day. We didn't hire a professional, association management company. We didn't, just hire administrative professionals from an HR pool. We did it ourselves. And every one of our staff has experience in drug and alcohol testing. So when you pick up the phone and you call us, we can answer your questions because we've stood in your shoes and do stand in your shoes. So I still get calls occasionally to go do random tests for companies who say, I can't find anybody in this part of Colorado. Can I send you the kits and can you go do the test for me? And I get so excited. I'm like, I would love to do that for you. So I get to go out on random still. So anyway, we continue to grow, and DESA had some major changes over the last few years, and they had multiple reorganization, restructural type issues. And it was just, things were changing dramatically for them. And so they asked for the merger. And as we explored, we did another exploratory committee. We worked for several months on that. We announced the intent to merge at their conference last March. And then at our conference in May, we actually signed the documents on stage for the initial merger. But the way that it worked out and the way that it came to fruition is DESA has ceased to exist, and the entity now is INDESA. So INDESA encompasses everything that DESA was and had, and we own the CPC, CPCT, your training manuals, your accreditation, all of that has been fully merged together. So, I know that there were some people that was hard for them because of the legacy, but I have to say the 6 DESA board members that were able to come and merge onto our board, they have just embraced this wholeheartedly. I think at first, and I don't think any one of them would mind me saying this, at first there was some nervousness about what is this going to look like. But within just a few weeks of working, especially on the training programs, and I know Patrice has watched this. She shared a lot of these committee experiences with us to look at all the training and how we could do that to the absolute highest standards. Excitement started building, and now it's just a seamless, beautiful operation. And it's just a wonderful thing. It's been fabulous. So we are now over 5,000 members strong together. Wow. And really it is just one membership association. So that's the story in a nutshell, if you will. And we're always happy to answer questions about that. But we basically rolled everybody's membership over to INDESA. Certificates are all now INDESA. If anybody still has their DESA and it's expiring, we take care of that for them. I really think we got everybody in the first 90 days, but there could be some out there that just don't check their email or change their email and didn't get the notice.
Right. Well, I'm glad you covered that up, because that's a question that I get often. Even when I was at Department of Interior last week, I was asking them, are they coming to training? Because I was a part of the initial spearhead of going to DAISA conferences from DOI back in 2015, I believe, in Vegas. And that was Joe Riley was my first instructor that I met. And I remember going there, not really knowing much, and that was the question that came about because when I came back to brief, my supervisor at the time, as far as what did I learn, what did I gather? So I took a bunch of trainer courses and, some other things, but it was the disconnect between the understanding of HHS and DOT, right? Like a lot of the HHS side of the house didn't feel that there was enough information for them. And that's probably why there's not a lot of HHS participants at the conferences. So this is one of the reasons, another one of the 10,000 reasons why I wanted to do this interview with you guys is to help clear that misinformation up. One of the things that I learned is that being at Department of Interior, for those who don't know the role, it's not really Department of Interior, it's Interior Business Center. So they're the ones that kind of are the third party service for the federal government testing, whether it's the Executive Office of the President, Department of State, or whoever. They kind of go through DOI, IBC. And they have components within there that has to follow certain DOT guidelines that are not covered by the drug-free workplace guidelines as far as when it comes to alcohol testing, right? Mm-hmm. If you don't know, for the HHS people who are listening, if you are drug program managers, there's also something that is covered by DOT that is not covered by drug-free workplace, which you're going to need to kind of incorporate both 4940, CFR 40, and drug-free workplace, which is when it comes to catheterization, because drug-free workplace does not cover catheterization, 4940 does. So if you want to add that into your policy, you have to understand more about 4940 and how to incorporate certain things that are not in your policy. So that's what I learned in the industry. Also going to these conferences is the fact that you're going to meet so many other different people, right? You get the MROs, you get the other entities, the third-party services, the Quest, and all these other things where you can get more information from the third-party services that you are responsible for, regardless of their, their shortcomings as a third-party service agency. But the regulation says that you are still the governing authority of the outcome of that. You're going to be held liable for that. So if you don't know what your collectors do, if you don't know what your MRO is supposed to do, or your SAP, and speaking of SAP, congratulations on your CSAPA, Joe. And so it's just these different combinations of what I learned there. So what I would like to ask you all about, especially you, Patrice, as far as the disconnect of the misinformation between HHS and DOT, and how important it is for HHS, as I just said, that, HHS, you do have to know DOT stuff because, one, you guys don't do alcohol tests, but you do have drivers who will fall under those guidelines of having to take alcohol tests. And did you know that DOI has one train left that they govern out of Valley Forge area, I believe it is that one train
I didn't know
that falls under, they get drug tested by DOI, and therefore they would have to do alcohol testing as well. And it's one train.
Nice. That would be Federal Railroad Administration.
Yeah. So it's like,
that gives me a lot to talk about.
They got this one train, but then you have FMCSA under the HHS from Department of State, right? Smithsonian, all these individuals who have CDL licenses that come through. So you have to know 4940. So that is, in DAISA right now is the largest, like I said, and the only that is focusing heavy on that. And now we're merging HHS specific training coming in as well.
We are.
But they have to know this DOT under that, Patrice.
Absolutely. And, I respectfully, I don't know if it's so much of a disconnect as people, it's people at the HHS and DOT level, when they're making these policies and regulations, are talking. but it's more, as you said, kind of this misunderstanding too about what do people need to know if they're doing federal agency collections. And, you know, you
And
mentioned
even the drug program managers that runs these individual, whoever oversees OIG, for instance, all these different drug program managers, they change over so often, right?
Right.
too.
And so even though the heads are talking, they keep leaving down here on the bottom as far as the actual program managers itself goes. And that's where I think that they're not getting the information as they come and go. So I'm speaking for those people.
I think it's very, very easy to get siloed. And it just happens like that because you can have interagency conversations way up here. But when your management, mid-level management, your collection sites, down here, the trickle down isn't happening. And because the trickle down isn't happening, you get silos. And then people are like, why should I go over there and hear that? That's about DOT. I don't need that. A, they do. But B, this is our industry. We are all in and a part of the same industry. And there's industry updates that are given that are not just DOT specific, not just HHS specific. They're specific to all of us. What's trending in drugs? What's trending in donors? Do we all know and understand that donors out there, no matter what industry we're talking about, no matter what part of, I guess I should say, our testing authority is, they're chatting via the internet, and they are learning that there's a chance that perhaps they could get out of a direct observe if they just claim to be a different gender. And so where gender identity, and I don't want to go down a whole path, I want to come back to what you're saying, but this is just an example where we have a lot of collection sites are unaware of what the rules say, whether you're HHS or DOT, about how you handle that situation, because it was just so rare that nobody even knew. I mean, literally, in 2020, I can tell you for certain, people did not believe me that we had this addressed in Part 40 and HHS several years prior. They were like, that is not true. That is not true.
Well, before you go further, I could tell you that in New Orleans, Patrice came in my class and talked about that when we were at a DAISHA conference in New Orleans.
Yes.
And it was out. Yeah, it was out then because we were addressing it then.
Yes. Yeah. So what has happened is we've been able to talk about these trends, and what do you do? How do you prepare? What you should say, what you may not say or do, and why it's important and valuable. And these are just conversations that we have organically. We also, I don't want to jump ahead too far, Greg, but one of the things that we feel very strongly about at our conferences is inspiring you to understand how you're part of a bigger picture of safety and the world of safety and making a difference. There's nothing, in my opinion, there's nothing more inspiring in your day-to-day work in drug testing than to come to an INDASA conference and walk away knowing that you are part of something greater, bigger, better, purposeful, and meaningful in your life. And those are the comments we get back from our attendees. Was I never want to miss another one because I had no idea what this was about. It's not just going and, oh, I know what HHS says, oh, I know what DOT says, or whatever. You get that. But recognizing what you're a part of is so inspiring and valuable. I think it makes better, more committed collections professionals and industry professionals because it brings more value to them as individuals. So I get very passionate about that. But that having been said, it is so much more than just an HHS class, right? Or a DOT class, which we also do.
Right. And, and the positive energy that goes on at these conferences, Greg, as you can probably imagine, I do a lot of public speaking all over the country, actually all over the world sometimes. And every conference is a little different. except that in the Endesa conference, there is a tremendous amount of positive energy and a desire among people to help each other. I mean, Endesa even has a mentorship group where they reach out to people who are new, whether they're new DERs or they're new collectors who want to start their own businesses. But, you know, kind of the mindset of the folks in the Endesa world is, hey, you know, we're in this together. We're safety partners. We're people who are not, we may be competitors, but we don't have to be competitors in the wrong ways. We can
Right.
share information, and what you're doing in Des Moines is not going to harm me in Queens, New York. It's just all going to be okay. And we're together, we're going to make it a better industry. And I think that there's just a lot of positivity. There's a lot of discussions that go on in the hallways and over lunch that bring people together domestically and internationally. So there's a lot to learn from an HHS, a DOT, and just a business aspect that gets picked up at this conference.
Yeah.
This
And
organization conferences.
and it's more than just the conference, because you guys are on the road now too, right?
We are.
You guys are, so this is the important thing of being a member, right? And being involved with Endesa and coming out to get this information, that there's more to it. Like you have the town hall meetings, right? You got the mentorship programs, you have the webinars, you have all this stuff going on. Now you guys are on the road doing the regional training. So which I like to talk about the regional training and actually what is that and what goes on.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, when oral fluid was released on June 1st, 2023, one of the things that we were very convinced of is that there is nothing more valuable to truly educating people and making sure they understand and comprehend the weight and the veracity, I guess I should say, of something so significant as this major rule change than being in the room with them. Emails just don't cut it. Webinars, we did some webinars in what was it, Patrice? April, May.
It was the beginning of May when the rule was first published, before it was effective.
Right. And we'd have like 1,000 people on a webinar. It was crazy.
Several days.
And Q&A, and we repeated them, but then we would spend weeks going, I didn't quite catch what you said about this. Can you repeat this so I can make sure I understood it? I had a phone call and I had to take it, or I had to step out and do a post-accident and I missed this part. So, and we went, you know what? We got to be in the room with folks. So we developed a campaign called Bringing Training Home to You, and we are going all over the country. And it really is where our members, mostly our state affiliates, but where they find us a location that's available and a hotel where people can stay. Dates are a little tricky now as we're getting into spring and we're coming up close to conference, but we will continue after conference. So we are already booking June, July, August, September, October. And we want to be in the room with people and explain the significance of the rule change. It's not just adding oral fluid, it's a major overhaul, truly, because oral fluid is being injected into every part of 49 Part 40. And so this changes things. But and I'll let Patrice get into this in more detail. Employers have to be ready for this. Yes, we don't have a device. We understand we don't have our devices yet, and we're waiting on our devices. However, when the device comes out is not when you start doing oral fluid if you haven't put it in your policy. And if your collectors don't know what they're supposed to do, what is your protocol? So there's preparation that takes place. For instance, a collection site needs to now have a completely new process for when someone walks in the door. How do you know what test type they're going to take? How do you know what that employer wants to do? Because it's not the donor's choice and it's not the collector's choice. It is not. It's the employer's choice. So unless you want to have your collection sites calling the DER every time a donor walks in the door, every single time, we have to have protocols in place for what we do next. And this takes time to turn a ship and do something completely different. So with that, I'm going to just hand it over to Patrice, and then we will talk about how you get to a regional training event.
Sure, thanks. And obviously the oral fluid rule is something near and dear to my heart because I was the primary author at the DOT. It is my name in the Federal Register as the point of contact with the ODAPSI email address so that you're not writing to my
personal
email address that tells you I'm out for 2 years. But what this is about is with the oral fluid rule, first of all, we had more comments than we had, more public comments than we had to any rules since the 2000 rewrite of Part 40 into plain language that I mentioned earlier. We had 417 commenters, and some of those commenters had 17-page single-spaced comment documents. So in essence, we were dealing with a couple thousand public comments. And when I say we, I was the one who read every single one of those 417 comments myself and made notes and then worked on them with the rulemaking team and what have you. So everybody understood what the trends were. But overwhelmingly, employers, employee unions, individual employees said, bring on the oral fluid testing, because HHS has determined that scientifically and forensically, oral fluid is the same as urine and fully defensible in both of those categories. So we are good to go with the science. So what we did was, in addition to adding oral fluid, what we did was we allowed substance abuse professional evaluations to go on remotely. That was something that we started to allow during COVID, and we realized it was getting an awful lot more people in the transportation industries the help they needed. Right. And those virtual, it kind of begs the question when you're saying to somebody, oh, you have an alcohol problem, you have an alcohol violation, and you need to seek somebody's attention to evaluate you and determine what you need. And then you're essentially asking that person to hop in a car and in some states drive 4 hours to get to the nearest substance abuse professional. So that was one change. There were many other changes, though, such as ensuring that the collector's telephone number in Step 1G of the Federal Drug Testing, Custody, and Control Form actually connects to the collector or their supervisor. No more call centers, because we were losing tests because MROs could not get legible copies, and they'd call and call and call these 800 numbers and not be able to speak to the collectors or obtain the copies that they needed in order to verify test results, negatives and positives. So we fixed that. We allowed more IDs than just Social Security number and employer issued IDs. Now you can use a driver's license. Of course, for CDLs, you could already use for FMCSA regulated CDLs, you use their CDL numbers. But there were an awful lot of other changes that went into effect. And the oral fluid, we were actually a little disappointed from a DOT perspective. We thought the labs would be ready to go. And what the problem is that, well, first of all, as you may know, Greg, HHS came out with their final rule in 2019 and made it effective in 2020. And not one single lab applied to become HHS certified.
Yeah.
So they waited for DOT, and when we came out with the rulemaking, and we have to follow HHS on the science, when we came out with the rulemaking, they said, okay, now we're going to get started on FDA clearance for the devices. And because oral fluid is different from urine, most of the examples of oral fluid involve a buffered pad that's put in someone's mouth, removed from the mouth, put into the specimen bottles, which would have a buffering solution in them. All that has to be FDA cleared. Right. So once DOT went out with their final rules, everybody said, okay, now we're going to go in for clearance. And that was a shock to DOT because we had no idea. We thought the market forces would have worked in such a way that everybody would have just been saying, come on, DOT, come out with this. And then we're going straight into HHS and getting our approval. And HHS was set. I worked very closely with Ron Flegel, the director of the Division of Workplace Programs, to ensure HHS was set to be able to do what they needed to do. His highly skilled and highly expert National Laboratory Certification Program was ready to get labs through on an expedited basis, but it didn't happen that way because folks are still trying to clear the laboratory chemistry, the immunoassays, and the reagents through the FDA to work with various buffering devices. What I can tell you, and this is really important because there's a lot of confusion out there, is what DOT and HHS would allow are not the point of collection testing devices for oral fluid that most of the people in the country use today. That is not allowable in federal testing. It's all laboratory based. And that may not sound like that much of a surprise to your audience for this podcast, because a lot of them are doing federal collections and they're used to lab based, but also everybody needs to know there are no approved labs yet, because guess what? The laboratories tell us at NDASA they're getting specimens every day as federal specimens, and they are not federal specimens, and they're not being tested as federal specimens. They're not being reported out as federal specimens, but yet people are proceeding to submit them. So
do you think it's because when that form came out, from OMB, and it had the oral fluid form, did that confuse a lot of people? Like, this is good to go now?
I don't think it's that, because that form's been out for about 6 years.
Yeah.
And the only thing HHS did was renew their OMB clearance on time in August of 2023, but it didn't make any further changes. So I think what the confusion was people heard that DOT has now approved oral fluid testing. And so they went ahead and did what they thought was correct oral fluid testing, and it was not. And so this training that we're bringing around is not collector training. It is absolutely not, because as I said, those devices and the reagents are going through FDA clearance. So nobody knows what devices are going to be used. And so you can't train collectors if you don't have devices, because it is like alcohol testing in a lot of ways. There is a manufacturer's piece here. How do you use the device? Right. And we have to be able to train to that. And if we don't know the device, then it would be irresponsible to conduct collector training. If anyone who listens to this is seeing advertisements for collector training on the internet for DOT oral fluid collections, those are not correct. Those are not possible to do at this point in time.
There's a lot of missing pieces still.
Yeah. There's some missing pieces, but then again, we're on top of it. What an employer needs to do in the meantime, and why we're going around and bringing oral fluid training home to you, as we say, is there's a lot of education that needs to go on. First, what changed with respect to urine in this final rule? Secondly, what does oral fluid look like? And thirdly, and most importantly, perhaps, is what Joe mentioned, is that collectors do not decide what kind of test is going to be done. And employees do not decide it. Employers do. And so working with Joe, we developed for NDASA a tool called the standing order. As part of our rulemaking at DOT, we discuss in great detail in the preamble, which is, of course, the story behind the regulation. It gets published with that final rule. We discuss in the preamble that every employer needs to have a standing order, meaning a document to communicate to their collectors what they want in a regular collection, a pre-employment, a random, a return to duty, etc. What kind of specimen collection do you want done? And also in problem collections, what do you want? So if you started as a urine test, but it goes into a shy bladder, do you want to continue with the shy bladder under urine, or would you like to switch to oral fluid? And so we developed this very simple guide. It's a one-pager, two-sided, that is available. It's a fillable PDF, and every employer can fill it out, sign it, or every CTPA can distribute it to their employers to fill out and sign. And then they can put it into their policies and rewrite their policies regarding what is expected. And also, speaking of policies, the Federal Railroad Administration is going to be using the NDASA standing order as part of the policy they are putting out to railroads to re-execute. So as the railroads start to develop their new policies, the model policy that FRA requires them to use, so that would apply to that Department of Interior railroad you mentioned,
Right.
that policy is going to have the NDASA standing order in it. And so, it's something that we've made available at no charge to people. It can be found through the NDASA website, but that is an important tool. And as we describe to people in the training, do you have to have it as a regulatory requirement to have a standing order? No, it is not. Can you run your testing program without it? We don't believe you can. Because as Joe said, you'd have to have a conversation between every collector and the DER before every collection begins. And that is a huge shift in paradigm from where we are today. Today, we know if there's a federal test, every test is going to be a urine test. The
Right.
analogy I use is you send an employee in for a test, and every time they get a vanilla ice cream cone. Well, after oral fluid becomes effective, we're going to have the option of a chocolate ice cream cone, but the employee won't choose that because actually you're paying for it. So the employee doesn't get the choice. You get to choose what you're going to vest them with. So there are just a lot of choices that have to be made, a lot of employer policy changes, a lot of things that an employer is going to want to know that we lay out very carefully. There are two different training courses that we've designed for this. One is what do employers, DERs, and CTPAs for FMCSA regulated owner operators, because those are the ones who act as employers. So basically, what do employers need to know about oral fluid testing? And it'll cover the urine and it'll cover the oral fluid. The other one is a much more in-depth 4-hour course on Train the Trainer, because also DOT requires that people have a Train the Trainer course if they're going to monitor mock collections. And so this fulfills that requirement. What the hope is, Greg, is that there will be people all over this country who are trained so that they can train collectors. In the meantime, while these devices are being developed and when they're identified to us, we at NDASA will have collector training designed and in place and available to those Train the Trainers. So when you go and take this course and become a Train the Trainer, you get access to the collector training materials from NDASA.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that important? A lot of your folks are going to be listening saying, yeah, but so what? I might not choose to implement this at all for 6 months or ever. Well, guess what? If you are covered by Part 40, if you are a federal agency who has people who fly planes, who operate commercial motor vehicles, who fall under those Part 40 tests, as soon as the first lab is approved, when you have a direct observed collection for an individual and they identify as transgender or non-binary, an oral fluid test will be the only choice. There will be no more direct observed collections once somebody identifies as transgender or non-binary. And that rule change was seen as really significant from a civil rights standpoint, that individuals who are transgender don't have to go through the embarrassment of, well, what gender observer do you want? It becomes, no, we're not even going down that path now. It's none of our business. And we're just going to move to an oral fluid collection, because that will be effective immediately as soon as the first laboratories are approved. You don't have time.
So would that be the same for HHS?
No.
Okay.
That is not. And under HHS each year, it's what, 1 to 200,000 tests per year that are conducted. Under the DOT program last year, it was 7.2 million. So there are a lot more of those tests, and that's why there's a press on for us to educate folks. But remember, if you're a federal agency, either in-house collector or contract collector, and you're doing any Part 40 collections, there is a difference today for urine. There's a difference between how HHS handles transgender collections and how DOT does. And then after oral fluid is approved, there's something else really important that I just described that you need to know and implement.
And And for those who are wondering why there's such a difference between DOT and HHS, is HHS are federal employees. They swear in under the oath of enlistment and they follow different parameters and different guidelines when it comes to their handling of their positives and refusals and so forth. So when we talk about DOT and HHS, it's not like we're trying to separate the two, but they really are because of the nature of the employment status between DOT employees and HHS.
Right.
Well, and there's even more than that, Greg, that I offer to our audiences when we talk about this. And actually, I go way back with Ron Flegel at the Division of Workplace Programs and with his predecessors. And I am in a testing designated position at the U.S. Department of Transportation. But I go to an office, or my colleagues at FAA may go to an air traffic control tower. When we're talking about people in the transportation regulated industries, they're walking through an airport and they're getting on an airplane, or they are driving a transit bus and someone comes and retrieves them from a bus where people might have been using drugs. You might have a DC bus driver who is switched out immediately and escorted to the collection site through no fault of their own. It's just the way the random tests are done. And they're coming off a school bus full of people who've been smoking marijuana. So there are all sorts of different protocols that go on in those situations. But when you think about the transportation workplace, think about people not in offices.
Right.
And that's the big difference between Ron's program and DOT's program and by Ron's, I mean the HHS program. You're talking much more about office workers much more frequently. It's a lot easier to call somebody down for a test than if they're out in your truck and they're 3,000 miles from home. You need a network of collection sites out there, and you need a different testing situation. In a post-accident on a trucking situation or a, heaven forbid, plane crash or something like that, you're not going to be able to get them to a collection site. You're going to have to do a collection right then and there. And so we go into detail about what's allowable in a portable potty. What is allowable if you don't even have a portable potty?
Right.
So, that's the difference to me, is the nature of the workforce, is that we're talking about a whole different type of job category when we're dealing with folks in the federal realm. And even those who drive trucks and fly the planes, at least having come from FAA, I can tell you the ones who fly out of Hangar 6 at National Airport and out of Atlantic City and out of Oklahoma, they go back to their home base at the end of the day. So
Right.
You can get them for a random. But when you got a pilot or a flight attendant who's bopping all over the country, good luck catching them and testing them. So it's just a whole different program, and that makes it a lot of fun and very interesting, but it also makes a need for the differences. And I think it's important from a civil rights standpoint to say that in the HHS program, if you move to a direct observed collection, you ask the person, are you a male or are you a female? That's not going to surprise their boss in the office, because
Right.
they know how that person presents in the workplace. If you ask that question of a long haul trucker, you write it on the chain of custody form,
Right.
you may have just outed a person who had felt safe cross-dressing in their role because they don't see their boss more than once a week. So now you have just violated somebody's privacy and their civil rights by telling their trucking company that they identify as female, or that they are a female identifying as a male. And that is a very, very important distinction. DOT would never have a collector ask a person, are you a male or are you a female? And then make those notations in the remarks column. And again, just think about the workplace. It's not that HHS is insensitive. It's that federal employees tend to work near their bosses.
Right.
Mhm.
So for you, Joe, what have you been hearing as far as FAQs on your side from the training that you guys are out doing? Because again, I get the questions, but like Patrice just hammered home that I think a lot of them were missing, is that you have to be proactive with this stuff, not reactive. And being
Right.
reactive will get you kind of hemmed up. right?
Right.
So what you guys do are being more on the proactive side of it, and policy plays a part, right? Because
Right.
the policy will tell you throughout all of 4940, well, actually, not even 4940, but when you get into the sub regulations per the agencies of how to handle and deal with the safety sensitive individuals, right? Part 120, the other parts are of which is whatever, they always tell you to be fair across the board with your policy. So what
Exactly.
you guys, I believe, is doing is the proactive side of that about you're going to have to establish this, right? To be fair across the board, because not only will you end up with some out of compliances from the DOT agencies, but civil penalties if someone feel that they've been mistreated over some others. Like, why are you giving me this and you're giving that person that? So do you guys get into those things about being proactive with your public?
We do. Our Q&As are so robust. It's just really taught us a lot. Because especially in the first probably 90 days of doing these trainings, the questions that we got led us to go back and get interpretations and to think these things through. So is it possible that someone will have a urine protocol, but on the standing order it says, for instance, in the event of a shy bladder or insufficient quantity, we'll switch to oral fluid? Yes. And then the questions become, well, then if we have a dry mouth, can we switch back? No. One bite of the apple. You don't go back and then back and then back. Is it possible that someone has a urine protocol and has an insufficient specimen that looks odd, smells odd, is an odd color, whatever, and then we move to oral fluid based on the standing order, and then we have specimen 1 of 2 and 2 of 2, but 2 different labs, because this one does not offer oral fluid and this one does. And so we have 1 of 1 going to lab A and 1 of 2 going to lab A, 2 of 2 going to lab B, 2 different MROs. Yes, that is possible. What do we do in that case? So we're teaching more than just, hey, there's been a rule change. Hey,
Right.
We're teaching conflict mitigation. We're teaching how to have a good training course for adult learners. We're teaching how to train up committed, solid collectors in a good environment. We're teaching how to do effective mock demonstrations, proficiency demonstrations, and keep your record keeping intact for inspectors who want to see those records. So we're offering provisional certificates based on when the devices come out and you obtain your you obtain your first oral fluid devices for your proficiency demonstrations. Then we will offer virtual and in-person mock trainings for this first wave of trainers. And once your mocks are complete, then you will get your 5-year certificate as a trainer. We feel it's important for people because it's such a new and vast change. We think it's important to know that we've got a first wave of several hundred trainers on the ground who have heard it right here, not only from a national organization, but from the primary author of the rule, so that they're clear and that we're training collectors effectively to understand how to carry out these protocols. So I think one of the things that people have said is that the Q&A is so valuable for them. And I just can't stress enough that internal protocols have to be carefully thought through. For those who are going to do oral fluid, they have to really consider, let me just give an example. We talk about the fact that, we teach, regardless of what mode or governmental agency you're testing under, regardless, you always want your collectors to do it the same way every time, right? For consistency. Right. They end up in court. What are we going to say? Because I do it the same way every time. That's how I know I did it that time. I checked the temperature, even though I forgot to check the box. Right. So now all of a sudden, you get someone with oral fluid as their first testing protocol. Do you still empty pockets? Do you still, right? So there's this, do you remove outerwear? Do you have to do any of that whatsoever? Because you're doing an oral swab. You're not sending them into a restroom by themselves and closing the door. So do we have to do that? My personal opinion is, if you want to continue the process of same way every time for consistency, then it's probably just best practice to continue doing it the same way every time regardless, because also that oral fluid protocol might turn into a urine collection and you've already gone through the proper steps. But maybe you don't want to do that. You just want to, quick and easy, get them in and out. But then how are you going to make sure your collectors stay very clear on, when it's this protocol, I do this, when it's that protocol, I do that. And I don't care what kind of collection site you are, we're all going to have those same issues. And so it's good for us to think through, how will I communicate this to my collectors? How will we manage these significant changes in just our daily flow of operations? So there is so much in there that we want people to think through, prepare now. Take a few months to sit down and do some tabletops with your team, some what ifs, and say, what do we think is the best approach here? How will we communicate with the employers? And for employers to say, what do we want our standing orders to look like? And what are the exceptions? And what questions do we need to ask now, so that when the devices come, we can hit the ground running? The other part that I want to say, we hear an awful lot of people saying, we're just not going to do it. We don't want to do oral fluid, so we don't need any of that because we reject it. Well, okay, your clients will come in with a protocol for oral fluid, and you need to know where you're going to send them and be prepared to lose those clients who say, no, we prefer this because all tests are observed. It's going to save us time and money. You don't want to do it. Where else can we go? Make sure you have referrals ready and that you're prepared to lose those clients.
Right.
Interesting times.
So on that side, like, also when it comes to the DERs, have to understand that they need this information from you guys, not simply because of that, but if you're not with the feds, you're probably with a company. And unless you are a single owner operator, you have a boss, you have supervisor, and you have stakeholders, right? So they may, regardless if you're the DER, may not want to do this, but those stakeholders and somebody else may say, well, why can't we switch to this? It's less intrusive, it's blah, 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 right? It's all of these things. So the DERs that are listening to this, you need this information because you're going to have to brief this to your stakeholders and to your supervisors at some point, and you're going to have to explain to them why you don't want to do this, right? Why, if you're saying you're one of them who are saying they don't want to do this, and most of the time, Joe, you're hearing that from DERs, not owners and not stakeholders, not VPs, not those particular individuals. So you guys are giving them the pros and cons of all of this and how to prepare for, what's to come. And I agree with you guys on the fact that if you're in a remote location somewhere, and a lot of my clients of FAA have remote locations and they cannot get collectors out there, whether it's a restroom or even on site. This will increase more probably on site testing and, for people being able to come out and do more on site testing, because you don't really need that standalone restroom and all that other stuff, right? The stuff that you have to go through the checklist. So there's so many more pros to the oral fluid, and especially like Patrice said, and I think it's kind of got overshadowed in a lot of the conversations that I hear, is the civil rights part of it.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Like, people focus on the fines and violations from the Fed, from the federal agencies, but I always brief them on, if it doesn't fall under here, they can come get you on the other side if they feel that you've been violated on the civil penalty side from, getting an attorney and whatnot. I know we've been on here probably longer than what I anticipated because this can go on forever and ever and ever. But how can they get the schedule? I'm looking at the schedule now. I know that you guys were just in Arlington because I got a phone call. So you guys got Atlanta, Memphis, and Bloomington coming up. So where
Coming
can
up,
they go
and
get that
that's
schedule?
prior to the conference. So if you go to indesa.com and click on events, we have our full schedule there. So we only have 3 events prior to our conference at the end of May. So end of February, and then April, and then February, March, and April. So we have, as you just mentioned, we'll have Memphis, Atlanta, and then Bloomington, Minnesota. And then we're booking for the summer. And as we get those solidified, we will put them on the website as well. But of course, we would love for people to come to conference. Another thing that I just want to mention about conference, regardless of the authority that you're testing under, our Train the Trainer course in person is just an absolute must for anyone who's doing any kind of collection and wants to train their staff. We have an excellent Train the Trainer course that I think should not be missed. So there's just so much to offer. We've covered that, but thanks, Greg, for the time. It's been so valuable, and we're always open to anyone who has more questions.
And before I give Patrice the last microphone, I do want to say, and this isn't me just because I got you guys on there, but I need to get out to one of your trainings because I want to be able to speak from a individual who attended. Like I can't speak from that right now, but I get the questions and answers. I don't have the answers to them, but I need to know what these pros and cons are, right? I just off knowledge of industry, I can have my own versions of pros and cons. But what is going on with you guys as far as those pros and cons go? What are the reality of these, legalities of it per, new guidances and new policies and whatever? Because I want to help prepare the individuals that speak to me, but I want them to come out, you guys to come out. And so in order to do that, I need to come out, right? So I need to make sure I get out to one of those. So
we agree.
I'm gonna have to try to make one of them, and I'm see which one. Probably Bloomington because I want to go to the Mall of America. So well,
there you go. Let's go shopping.
I got darn, tax write. Bloomington. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Patrice, to close out. As far as what would you like to leave everybody with?
Okay, well, thank you, Greg. Well, first of all, it's been an honor and a pleasure to do this with you. I've known you for quite a long time, and it's great to be back together to talk. And I just want to encourage everybody to, consider reading over the regulation, reading over the preamble. You'll find that also on the ODAPSI webpage that I had given earlier, www.transportation.gov/Oscar Delta Alpha Papa Charlie. And when you look there, you can look up the rule and you can read the preamble. A lot of things are going to be answered in that preamble. It was a 220-page Word document. So you may feel it's a little bit long, but then again, I think that's going to provide you with a lot of insight, as it does on all the DOT rulemakings. Preambles are key. And the other thing is really, it's a pleasure to speak to people while we're out on the road, bringing oral fluid home to them. And these sessions they don't just have Q&A at the end. They truly are interactive. And whenever people ask me, are we going to do these online? Joe and I have discussed it so many times. We are not going to do these online because we really want people to have live interactions in person where they can ask the questions, because you see around the room people nodding, going, oh yeah, I was thinking that, or gee, that's a great question. And with that kind of input, I'm also able to give that feedback to ODAPSI. So as they're working on the oral fluid collector guidelines, it makes a better work product. So I would encourage people to come out I would encourage people to bring their ideas, bring their questions, and know that we're doing everything we can to make this successful for everybody involved. And it's really a pleasure to do it. Thank you.
All right, and just like before, I would have all of this in the description box below with all of the links to all of this, where you can go sign up to become a member of NDASA and to follow the training that's going around with the oral fluid testing. And not just that, they have other stuff there. FMCSA be at the training, and a bunch of other things going on at the training. So you got to stay abreast of your regulations and make sure you like and subscribe and pass this on and share so that we can get this information out to the industry. And I will see you guys soon at one of these events in the future. All right, guys.
We
All right,
can't
see you
wait.
later.
Greg,
Bye,
thank you for
everybody.
all that you do.
All right. Bye-bye.